this video, we're going to be making some modern drum and bass from scratch in FL Studio. It's been a while since I've done a video like this. And of course, we're starting from the very beginning. I don't even have an idea yet. So the preview you heard will be what I eventually come up with. And I'm going to try to keep this as beginner friendly as possible in terms of like explaining what I'm doing. But there will be some third-party plugins that I reach for as I do this. So we've started in my little template project here, which just has sidechain trigger set up. That's it. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to open up Serum 2, which is my favorite synth to use, really. And I think the first thing I want to do is just come up with a nice little chord progression. So I'm not going to worry too much about the sound design yet. I'm just going to throw some unison saws and really just see what we come up with here. And I'll explain my process of chords too. So here's a note. The way I usually do basic chords, if you don't know how to do them, here I just have a note that I'm going to start with, and I will go up 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, then 5, 6, 7. This has created a major chord. It sounds like this. And from there, I'll usually just mess with voicings, which is like changing which octave certain notes are on, and then adding things that I think sound nice. That's quite nice. And then in terms of which notes I pick to make a progression, I usually just go by ear. I'm going to do the same rule again here. So right now I've just put together this little progression. It's not going to sound inspiring yet, but this is the general movement we have. This is just basically going to be a bedding for our track. This could probably layer into the drop and just be a nice noise layer, and I'll explain how I go about making this sound decent. So I think first of all, we're going to make it pretty rhythmic. So I'm going to take an LFO and drag it to the cutoff of a low pass filter, which right now by default does this. Right? And I think we're going to want something a little like this. We're going to throw on some reverb too, put this in a space. And this is where I'll write over. So like I'll mess with writing a lead melody or something, because generally this is pretty inspiring. So I'm going to open up a new sound. I'm thinking maybe a piano, like this. And I'm just going to try to riff for a bit, see if any melodies suggest themselves. Right, I've just come up with this right now. This is going to sound a little silly on its own, but bear with me here. Something like that. I'm thinking this is going to be a pretty heavily reverbed pluck that's going to give this a lot of space, and then we'll do like a little call and response type thing to fill in this empty section here. So what I'm going to instead do now is replace the piano with a synth, and we're going to try to make something that fits that vibe. A technique I like a lot is actually grabbing a one-shot and throwing it into Serum and using it. So like for example, like this, if we drag it and make it as a sample. Some compression maybe to make it a little bigger. And then I think I'm going to throw some delay on it to give it some more rhythm. So the plan is to make this like chill section like this, and then take this same melody and replace it with like a big patch later for a drop. The next thing I'm going to do is get like a really wet sound to really fill out some background space. Something like this is pretty nice. Next thing this needs is a bass line with some cool little movement to kind of get us in the vibe. This is really going to be what glues it together, I think. And I'm going to use a simple low-passed Reese with that kind of tone to it. Something like that. That starts putting us in our drum and bass territory that we want to be in. Up next, I think this is going to want a little more static chord stuff going on, so I'm thinking grab a piano and throw those chords on there and process it quite a bit. I really like hyper compressing my pianos. I think it sounds kind of cool. And then lowering our velocity so it's not as harsh. Yeah. Next thing this needs is a pretty type of ARP that could just be doing a repetitive melody in the background over all of this. I'm going to write it first with a saw wave, and then we'll find the sound. Something like that. This will sound a lot better once we find the right sound for it and make it like pretty sounding. I think something like this, but with a lot of delay. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go big. We're going to make something that uses like these melodies, but like bigger sounds. We add our drums, and we're going to have a drop section. So the very first thing I'm going to do is grab an element that will be our like foundation of the chords in the drop. So it's going to be much noisier, less low passed than what we have before. Something like this. We're going to put that on a mixer, cut out the lows because we're going to have a bass that's going to be filling up that job. The next thing we're going to replace is this lead. Not going to be that, obviously. This is now going to be a very loud, heavy synth. So let's copy the MIDI. We're going to make a new patch and do that. A lot of the sounds I'm grabbing are from the Muzz drum and bass pack. I think it's really good for starting off. It's got a lot of cool things for like basses, drop synths. We're going to use one of these and see how it sounds. That's a really cool sound. We got to hear it in context though. Let's try out a few more. That might be the one. I think I might start on the high octave and then go lower a second repetition, because I do like the sound of both of those. This is another thing that wants some delay, because there's those empty sections which are there on purpose that we're going to want to sound big later. So let's get that going. Next, we're going to replace our bass. This is going to give you a really good idea of like what our drop will end up sounding like. This is going to be responsible for a lot, because it's not just sub frequencies. This is going to be a nice full spectrum thing. So let's see what we can grab from our bass presets here too. I like this one, but the low pass isn't right, so this is where you tweak the presets to sound right to your song. I think it wants to be a lot more like that, or maybe even... That might be right. I think I'm also going to add this synth from before over the drop, because it's going to fit nicely. Now I think we're at a point where we're ready to add some drums. And something I like to do, I always like to do all of my drums like on my own. Like I'll get the kick that I like, a snare that I like. But just to get a vibe, I like to throw in a loop just to see if we're cooking, basically. So we're going to drag that in and just see how it sounds. It's not going to be sidechained, and because we're running hot into limiters and stuff, this is going to sound pretty crushed. Let's take a listen. Right. I think we're working with something there. We're going to get this going. So the first thing we're going to do is get a kick drum that we want to use. We'll put it where it needs to be. Just like that. And the kick is going to go onto its own mixer channel. We're going to do some side chaining now, and this is pretty important, but I actually have this set up, and I've made videos about this where it's like really easy to get this right. What I'm going to do is side chain the kick to a bus, which I'm going to put everything that needs to be side chained into. So we're just going to loop a section here. This is going to go to it. So is that. All of these. And on that bus, we are going to use this free plugin called Compactor by Kilohertz. Turn on sidechain mode and go into the processing tab here and select your kick. Now, if we take our release to 0, this is going to give you ring mod sidechain. It's going to sound pretty good when we throw everything else in there. Next, we're going to grab a snare, and we're going to throw in a top loop. Now we have a really good kind of concept of a drop here. I think we need to introduce a new synth that's going to play a little melody in that little gap in the lead. So, for example... Literally just that, but we're going to change the sound and make it decent. We might do some sound design on our own here. I think this could just get away with being a sine wave, and we'll add a second one that's going to be like an octave up with some unison, giving you this sort of tone. This is going to be up high, but we're going to do decay, so we get a sound like this. Higher, like this. That with a lot of reverb and compression is going to sound really big when we put it in that space. So let's make that happen. Literally like that. Throw it in, see how we sound. I think for the second repetition, we can go an octave down to make it a little different. Let's see how that sounds. All right, let's take a listen to what we have so far. It's missing transition, so it's just gonna go from intro to drop right now, and a lot of polishing, but I think that's stuff we could dedicate an entire part 2 to doing. So let's see what we have. So that's what we came up with so far. I'm looking at OBS right now before I've edited this, of course, and we're 34 minutes into it. So this is the first half hour of a drum and bass tune. As I say, let me know if you want to see a part 2 where we go over polishing it, because I genuinely do think that's what makes all of the difference. Like, if we end up getting to part 2 on this and this gets polished, it will sound miles better than this. That's a really important stage, but this is kind of how I get the foundations of a track going here. Once I have like the melodic idea, all that other stuff comes later. And once you add stuff like guitars in there, especially over that drop, like throw some nice electric guitar on it, that's going to sound really nice and polished. So let me know if you want to see that in the comment section below. Drop a like if you enjoyed and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.